Welcome to our third session of the future of GBS. We are broadcasting live on several channels, including YouTube, as well as LinkedIn. And we will also be recording this for people who won't be able to watch it today, but they can always go back and watch it on our YouTube channel, as well as from our website. This has been a fantastic journey so far. We started out in January, and we had experts coming in, joining us from different parts of the world, expressing their opinions, their views on what they see as the future of global shared services is going to be. Interestingly, we've got another fantastic topic for today, and it is, should GBS own knowledge management as it's part of its future? And as you know, that ever since the advent of shared services back in the 90s, when it started out as primarily take advantage of highly skilled people in another part of the world at a lower cost, and use their expertise, their knowledge, as well as their ability to do work together from a single location to cover the organizations globally. Fast forward 2 decades, actually more than 2 decades, what we find is that concept of taking advantage of people in another part of the world has primarily remained as a cost lever, as a cost arbitrage, labor arbitrage. On the other side, when you go and ask and look at the global shared service organization, you find smatterings of knowledge management strewn all across the organization. And this is indeed an area where we believe that the right ingredients, the critical factors that are required for an organization to be a knowledge management are rightly resident in the global shared services. But at the same time, when you look at some of the leading knowledge management organizations, whether they are the consulting companies like McKinsey, Bain, PwC, Ernst & Young, the Big Fours, and the others, or you have the design companies like the IDEOs, or you have the research market intelligence companies like the Gartners, the Forresters of this world, HFS of this world, what you'll find is that they have taken the knowledge part of it and taken it to a completely different level and have become truly knowledge management organization, producing magnificent insights. Now, some of you may argue and say, hey, listen, this is all external, but even for internal, how many of the global shared service organizations have actually gone beyond producing business intelligence reports, financial reports, etc., and provided true insight to become a true knowledge management hub of an organization? So that is going to be the topic today. And I've been joined by 3 esteemed panelists from all over the globe, as usual. And I'll start first with the person who's furthest away from Amsterdam, and that's Shane Stacey, my friend and my ex-colleague from GE, who's right now based in either Melbourne or Sydney. Shane, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Arnavan. Yeah, as you mentioned, down here in Australia, in Sydney. So it's great to be able to join. It's lovely to be able to reconnect with yourself after so many years. If you think working within GBS environments and finance shared service and driving transformation's probably been part of the focus of my career for 20 plus years. I kind of see that during that time, as you said, it's initially become labor arbitrage strategies. I've worked within captive operations, worked heavily with BPOs, and now back with WPP out here in Australia. So I think it's been, from a career perspective, a real thrill where you can actually have a genuine career, add a lot of value within the GBS environment. So very much looking forward to the conversation with the team today.
Brilliant, brilliant. Welcome, Shane, again. And then let's introduce the Lion of Kuala Lumpur, Michael Warren, who's been associated with Outsourcing Malaysia, with everything that has been shared services and outsourcing and digital platform, and so many other pieces that have literally been the backbone of Malaysia as one of the important players in the global shared services. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. So it's an honor to be part of this discussion. background for the people participating on the call. My background is probably about 3.5 decades of technology and services. I've done startups, but a lot of my business has been around running big multinationals around the region, mainly out of Southeast Asia, but I've done stuff elsewhere as well. And it's a combination of stuff from the vendor industry to the to companies that are running services. I've been the CIO of a very large organization of about 60,000 people across 15 countries. But in the last 10 years or so, I've been involved with government and policy and regulation in shaping stuff that's happening here in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. So moving Malaysia, where I'm a Malaysian, moving Malaysia up the value chain to bring in shared service companies into this region. We are one of the top countries in the world. We're ranked 3rd in the world by AT Kearney. And a lot of my focus has been in building shared services and GBS companies and getting them to come into this region to do work here. So the pain points of what works, what doesn't work, that's something that's been very critical to what I've been doing. So Nivan, thank you so much for inviting me. I really look forward to being part of this discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael, and welcome to the forum today. And last but not least, Mike Stobbs, who recently retired from the active service. Now, we don't know if it's due to the shared services or if it's because you want to change the world of shared services and therefore you have retired. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mike and let's hear about your background.
Hi, everybody. Yes, recently retired from the role of Group Director of Business Services for a glass manufacturer, a global glass manufacturer called Nippon Sheet Glass, headquartered in Tokyo. And I had teams in Poland, or major teams in Poland, China, and Brazil, serving the world globally on that. By background, I'm from an IT background, so 30 odd years in IT, but the last 10 years have been developing and operating GBS, and found it thoroughly enjoyable, as I hope I will find it in retirement thoroughly enjoyable as well. So I'm very much looking forward to the next exciting part of my life. But that said, I really enjoyed all of the GBS work in my career up until then. So it was really good. And thank you for the opportunity to hopefully share some of my views and knowledge with yourselves.
Brilliant, brilliant. Welcome, Mike, to the session today. For those of you who are joining us on live streaming platforms, if you have any questions, please feel free to post it on those platforms, whether it's YouTube or on LinkedIn. Absolutely post in your questions, and we'll try and see if we can answer them either through this or post the event. But do keep them coming. As well as if you want to share with your friends and colleagues. I mean, this is a wonderful platform to share ideas from top leaders, top thought leaders from the industry. So back to the point. So maybe, Mike, we start with you. You know, we talk about should GBS reinvent itself as a knowledge management company. What's your definition of knowledge management? When do you say that a company has actually become a knowledge management company, rather than just because I handle tons of documents called invoices and purchase orders, that makes me a knowledge management company?
Okay. Well, firstly, I'll just address the should we reinvent ourselves as a knowledge hub? The short answer is no, absolutely not. We should evolve to add that to the portfolio of services, but I think reinvention sort of implies dropping all the good stuff that's got us here today and got us a seat at the table. In terms of knowledge management and what knowledge is, I mean, there's plenty of different styles of knowledge. Obviously, there's the reporting that we all start off with, and you know, we shouldn't underestimate having one honest, transparent, open view of fact, as opposed to various flattering rose-tinted views that are presented by self-interested parts of the business. But you then move on to what's happening in the rest of the company, what's happening in what people would refer to as the value add. My personal view is, if you're not adding value, what are you doing? Why are you doing anything? But the more business facing areas, and you've got speciality knowledge. So even within the functions, you've got things like VAT and commodity codes and various things to whichever business you're in as well, that are knowledge and need managing. And then there's the whole idea of business analysis of the information within your organization, and how that then is impacted by external factors as well. So bringing in external knowledge in, being the source of that knowledge. So fundamentally, if your organization has either a knowledge management problem, i.e. people not sharing or not good enough knowledge, or an opportunity that you think you can get better at, then absolutely GBS is a good place to do it. But we shouldn't be saying GBS should do it just because we want to do something more interesting.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Mike,
Shane, go on.
it'd be good to be able to pick up on that, because I think over time I've had numerous roles, and really see the start of the process has always been around, the transactional work, trying to get efficiency into that. It's definitely more around, a number of them are around labor arbitrage to begin with, but fundamentally that once you can develop the, I guess, the comfort and the belief that the GBS team can actually perform the skills in a centralized function, I think you've got that capacity to then start to evolve. And I'm much like you, it's an extension of it. And a lot of that is really building upon capability, because I think a lot of organizations initially start out with, the people side. There's always challenges I've seen within large organizations around the system piece. And the other element, there's, I've been involved in a lot of them that have been heavily financial services, but also a couple that have had the employee services piece. I think there's a real opportunity to connect the various towers in a far more powerful way. They really still tend to have their own individual goals. But if you have a look between AR, AP, Treasury and the like, there's a huge amount of co-located data there, but I don't think organizations have got the focus yet to go beyond and join what's already within the GBS environment to be able to bring greater value out of it. And I think that's the real challenge for a lot of companies, that, you just don't go and do something because a lot of the GBS environments have access to data, and data is theoretically meant to be linked to the knowledge. But if you can't bring the technology or have the competency in there, and I think that's one of the big parts, that you start out with a more of a processing skill set, but you got to also be able to uplift that value. I think BPOs have always been strong in trying to drive a level of continuous improvement around process, but I think for it to become a real knowledge hub, it's got to look deeper than just a process improve, but what's the knowledge that's coming out, and how do you feed it stronger across the various components within your business?
I agree entirely, Shane, on that. I think the one thing, probably one of the best bits in my career in business services, was when the chief operating officer said, "I don't want to hear anything more about cost." That's just a given. Tell me about the quality improvement. So all of these things that we start off transactionally, people saying, "Oh, you're going to struggle, you're going to struggle." Of course, we didn't struggle. And then you start moving up that chain where the knowledge needs to be a bit there. Perhaps it's a bit more nuanced or a bit more detailed knowledge. And of course we can do that. And, it's a case of earning the right then to be able to look at that. But every time I say we, in my old role, every time we took on a piece of work, we ended up doing it better and faster, more accurately, faster. as well as cheaper. And it was the first two of those that earns you the right to then start saying, right, let's start discussing where we can add further value by putting these pieces of knowledge together. Because the CXO, generally speaking, is not a good cabinet player. They want to make sure their X column or pillar is okay. If they've got any spare resource after that, they might just see if they can help the rest of the company. So all of the reports that come out are going to be slanted that way. It either consciously or even subconsciously slanted that way. I remember the CFO telling me one time that the controllers are going to hate me because I'm taking away their ability to massage the reports. And it's true, they did hate us, but we ended up with an honest picture of where we were, which can only be good for the organization. And GBS has that view right across the organization, and long may that continue. It shouldn't be focused down onto being its own pillar.
Right. Michael, what's your thought on should GBS reinvent or shared services reinvent themselves as knowledge management? Taking the quote from Mike saying the CFO doesn't want to talk about cost anymore.
Yeah, I think it's very much dependent on the level of trust from the organization to where the service organization is taking place. When you set up a GBS organization, when you set up a shared service organization, when you set up a call center, you're setting up an operation in a different location, somewhere else, outside of where you are. You tend to outsource stuff that is non-core to your business. So you take things that are not very critical, and that's the starting point. You outsource stuff that is non-critical, and then you set it up in a location which is far away. And then you say, here, go set up a center over there. Now, the problem is, until you build a level of trust in what's happening in that location, as that level of trust increases, you can start increasing and putting in more functions. So you can start with a contact center. And as you feel that the management, the people there are delivering what the business requires, then you start moving up into shared services, into global business services. You might be able to move into knowledge management. But knowledge management in an organization is very often restricted to where the CEO, the CFO are sitting. I mean, knowledge management is about innovation. It's about the future strategy of the organization and where they're going to. I mean, the transactional part of a contact center or shared services is very much, I will tell you what to do, you do it, you optimize it, you drive down my costs, and you do it well. You don't come back and challenge me with something that is very different. That's a shared service, that's a contact center. But as you start moving into GBS, then you're starting to add value to the business. And then as you move up and you become more and more trusted, then you move into knowledge management. So I think it really depends on focus, the autonomy that you want to give a center, and the responsibility that you want to give a center. Yes, I believe a GBS can become a knowledge center, but it is fit for purpose. What works for you today may not work for you tomorrow. It really depends on where the organization is going. I'll stop there at that stage. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's a nice way of articulating your thoughts. So let's look at, when we talk about knowledge management, we also find inconsistency of definition, because people interchangeably use knowledge with information on one side and knowledge with intelligence on the other side. And when I say intelligence, I'm not talking about the IQ, I'm talking about the market intelligence, the business intelligence, and so on and so forth. And what we find is there is an inconsistency that kind of exists in knowledge management. So I want to hear your views on what would you say a true knowledge management function should be?
I think honestly, if I pick it up from where I left off this now, I think it all revolves around data. You know, whether we're a contact center, a shared center, a GBS center, the amount of data that flows through our organization is huge. And this is data from the company. Now, the ability to take the data and to transform it into information, and that ability to take that information and transform it into dashboards, to knowledge, stuff that can be used to drive business. That is critical. So it's not just the data flowing through, and it's not just the information flowing through. It's the whole process of how do you manage it? How do you take it and massage it, analyze it, define it, and bring it back and add value to the organization? Because if you can't add value, it's not knowledge. You know, it is just basically data flowing all over the place. So if you get a CFO who wakes up one morning and says, show me a dashboard, and the dashboard is just a lot of information, it's not added value to the CFO. But he looks at a dashboard and he looks at trend analysis and things that are going wrong, and he looks at hedging information and various other things. And then that CFO could turn around and say, oh, you know, based on that, I can dive into issues that matter. You know, then that becomes useful to the business.
Yeah, great point. You know, and I'm just going to also ask Shane and Mike, because literally the dashboard, you know, there's what we find is there is a data producer, then there is the dashboard creator, and then there is a dashboard consumer. The question is, who should own the insights generation, the knowledge generation in the process? You know, so just you know, adding on that question, that angle, and let's hear Shane. You know, you were nodding your head, so let's hear your views first, and then we'll go to Mike.
Yeah, Anirvan, what I kind of like see, especially in the current role that I've got, the knowledge management I kind of like see is hugely linked to the expertise you can bring to it. So I know in our company, controls are fundamental. It's one of the really strong parts that I had to deal with in coming into WPP. So there's a massive effort that I kind of like see in my team in not only being able to understand the controls, but also be able to show that across all the processes that we've got, we are actually the expert in that process. And I think once you can start to create that level of comfort from the business side, it's taken a lot, I think, in our organization for us to be influenced on the process as opposed to being able to own the process. And as a result of being able to own the process, I think you get better capabilities through your dashboards, what's coming out to be able to influence whether it's process improvement, go back to the business, and you start to have a more meaningful conversation around what are the insights, what are the actions that are coming out of it. But to me, that only comes being able to prove that you've actually got the expertise in the process and you can actually put the right skill set against it. I think if you don't even have that, then you're still at a transactional level and being too influenced by the business side. So for the GBS model, I think to properly work up front, it is that co-designer process, really trying to minimize the level of variation in what, whether it's each agency or what each country is doing within the operating model, because it's only then that you can start to get a lot more value out of the metrics and the decisions that's going to come out of the GBS operation. And to me, that's one of the hardest pieces. And you got to, initially it does become people-based, but the more that you can really streamline those processes and have proactive conversations with the business, I think you're getting in a far more leverageable position for the GBS to add value and really start to own the knowledge and the outcome and how that impacts the organization.
Yeah, I think One of the things that I found out was because you are looking across the business units, you're looking across the functions, you're one of the few people in the organization as a GBS that can ask those sort of inquisitive 3-year-old questions of why. You know, because usually the CFO doesn't have time to look into the detail on at each level, and nor should they need to. But then when you get to a controller, the controller's only looking really at their own business area, and they're not thinking, well, hold on a minute, you know, this business unit to the left of me is doing better, this business unit to the right of me is doing worse. What's going on? So it's that ability to ask those questions, partially by just doing the fundamentals right and getting the details and the accuracy right. One of the bigger problems, you know, we have to start from data, and one of the bigger problems is most people don't see data as their problem. They'll put in enough information into whatever system it is to allow them to go to the next part of their job. And if that means by categorizing something as other rather than categorizing it properly, they will do so. We had our head of procurement wanted to buy some procurement analytics, and I sat down with him and basically said, there's not much point, because I can tell you what it's going to tell you. You buy a lot of stuff, because nobody had actually put in what the categorization of the spend was. They'd put in just enough to get them to the next screen and then on to the next deal, etc. So there was no ownership of that until it came into GBS. And we started saying, no, this is just not good enough. And then you can start doing things with that. That's, you know, workable information that you can actually take decisions based on. So you do need to get hold of that bit at the bottom and ask those questions. And I think in asking those questions, I mean, as I say, I'm from an IT background, so I was asking questions of the finance community. You know, I couldn't spell AR or AP when I started, and you're asking those questions feeling extremely stupid. And when they can't answer it, you think, just a minute. Now we're getting to somewhere where the organization as a whole needs to change what it's doing, or get to a point where it does understand and can explain why these two figures are different, etc. But I think you come out, we've got to work together. If this is seen as a power grab, you know, knowledge is power, isn't it, in a lot of organizations. So if this is seen as a GBS power grab, you know, that we were successful to begin with because we took all the stuff nobody else really wanted to do, couldn't stand doing, so we did it, and we did it better, and etc. But once you start then moving up, you have to be working together with them. You have to make the CXO and their team look better because of the work you're giving them. So, you know, it's the classic one of leading from behind. In a way, you're just saying, look, I've made you look good, and then eventually they'll come to you saying, could you make me look a bit better, or what about this, or what about that? But it's if it's seen as a power grab, I suspect we'll just end up failing again, because the whole organization has to work together, from whoever puts the data in the first place to whoever uses it at the far end. And I don't really care whether that's in GBS or in any other part of the organization. They have to work together for a common goal of getting that all transparent and understood.
And Mike, what you were talking about there, and I think touching on some of the challenges we've got at in the current environment, the integrity of the data and how systems were used in the past, and it doesn't matter whether or not the knowledge is going to reside within a part of the business or part of the GBS. The focus to get data quality and hygiene, and as you start to use BI tools to be able to extract the information, I think the organization always has a fairly large journey to even get to that first point. So all these things around going from whether it's the historical purpose of the business or even GBS to go into a knowledge environment, the organization really has to work out where it is today, what does it need to do in being able to get the data right so that you can even start to use technology to drive the knowledge-based decisions, regardless of where they're going to be performed.
Absolutely. You're coming from an IT background. I remember a number of people sort of blaming SAP for the fact that we couldn't analyze what the data was. Well, SAP didn't make the data up itself, it's people that did that within the system. And then, of course, people then go off to use Excel because they don't trust the SAP, and then you get versions of the truth, etc. So the appetite, A, to recognize that there's a responsibility across the organization, and then B, the appetite to do something about it. Because again, if you're the only one who cares, it's going to be a tough old job, but you can put your own house in order and then lead by example, I suppose.
Interesting that, while you guys are talking about, an idea sort of occurred to me, or rather a thought occurred to me, which is quite often, and that's been an observation in my sort of 25 plus years experience in this space, is that knowledge management or contextual knowledge insights gives an opportunity that's both to a function as well as to an individual. What we find is what I found was some of the people who have actually done or excelled really well have been people, especially director level people, senior management level people in shared services, who've been able to develop these capabilities of developing insights and further their careers. It may sound very negative, but it has produced an immense opportunity for people to do that. On the other side, if you look at people, I say the breakaway point happens kind of in the middle management. So when you're early, young, and you've got the qualifications, you get into shared services or outsource services, you do it. And then in the middle management, the moment you start developing contextual understanding and the knowledge and the overarching understanding of the business, you start catapulting to the next level, versus where you stayed focused on managing the transaction, you kind of remain stuck in the middle management layer. Did you guys see something similar in your experience, or with that knowledge management, instead of just offering an opportunity to function, it has offered opportunities to individuals, and some of them have been able to leverage and been able to move on and leapfrog their careers?
Maybe, Anirudh, I can share some of the stuff that's been happening in Malaysia and around the region. I think I joined the government around 2012 in Malaysia. And at that stage, in Malaysia, we had 10 years prior to that, we had started building up contact centers and then shared centers. So shared service organizations started to develop. And so when I came in 2012, we had about 200 plus shared service organizations already operating in Malaysia, and very large multinationals, local companies, and so on. One of the things that I found was that shared services was very much about cost containment. It was very much about how do we drive the processes, how do we optimize the processes, how do we drive the costs down. And shared services and outsourcing was very much in dealing with the CFOs, because the CFOs, their KPIs was how to drive costs down. When I joined in 2012, I started to realize, that we had finance hubs. These were vertical towers, a finance hub, a HR hub, an IT hub. And these hubs reported into the head of finance, the head of HR, the head of IT. And these hubs could be located anywhere in India, in Philippines, in Malaysia, in different locations. It was always about driving down costs. And I realized that we were starting to get to a point that as we started to drive down costs, there's a certain point where you can't drive down costs anymore. You cannot optimize it anymore. And then when you get to a certain level, people will turn around and say, well, okay, tough luck, Malaysia. I'm going to move everything out of Malaysia and move to Philippines, or I'm going to move to India, because I'm going to drive down costs further, and I have to move whole towers away in other locations. So in 2012, when I started looking at what was happening here, I turned around and I said, we have to change the dynamics of what people are doing. We have to add value. It's not about driving down costs, it's about adding value. So I launched the Global Business Services Hub here in Kuala Lumpur. And I turned around and I said, I'm not going to call my organization in the government shared services and outsourcing. I'm going to call it Global Business Services. And I had a huge backlash from the global communities. SSON from the US turned around and screamed bloody murder at me and said, you know, what the hell are you doing? SSON has been around for all this time. How can you change it to GBS? And I said, look, it's not about optimization. It's about adding value, you know, and we started turning that on. And that's where we started to realize that as you bring the towers together, instead of looking at them as verticals, you look to them as supply chain horizontals. And then you start to say, how can I integrate my finance with my HR, with my IT? How can I add value to the organization? So my discussion then becomes a value add discussion with the CEO of the company about how can I grow your business, not about how can I control cost. You know, and that is a very different value proposition. And that's what propelled Malaysia to go from where we were, from about 200 plus companies, to about 650 companies over a period of time. The business exploded because companies started coming in and putting in supply chains that were linked together, you know, and that was big. So I think the same thing applies to knowledge management. If we talk about knowledge management, that level of trust has to be with the CEO, the CIO, the people at the very top. It's not about cost optimization anymore, you know, and I think that's where the value is. But it's a whole mindset of, do you allow that to happen or not? If you ask me, a shared service organization is about, this is your job, do it and do it very well. Optimize it and optimize it very well. A GBS organization is about, how do I take that and help you make more money? A knowledge process organization is about think outside the box. 80% of all the business that happens in knowledge process is outside the box. It's not going to be in a cookie cutter style environment. It's about something that's very different to build the organization to where they want to go to. You know, and I think that's what we need to look at in this space. But it really depends on whether the CEO and the top management of the organization, whether the culture of the organization is willing to allow that to take place. You know, if they're not, don't do it. I'm not saying it's bad. There's still a place for there's still a place for contact centers. There's still a place for shared service. There's still a place for global business services. And knowledge management is a very small group of people, and there's still a place for that. But it depends on whether the CEO will allow them to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the way you articulated it, Michael. And I saw Mike and Shane both nodding their heads. So I'm just going to come to you guys in just a sec. Let me add to what you just said, right? So essentially, the mantra of cost containment went on till about 15 years or 20 years, till about the advent of RPA back in sort of 2014, 2015, when some of the organizations started moving in that direction, right? In 2022, majority of the C-level people, executives, are demanding more of the shared services. They want the shared service leaders to start thinking beyond the cost discussion that they've been having for the last 2.5 decades, right? And this is where, on one side, the C-level people are expecting more, but they want to hear from, let's say, the shared services leaders on what that new sort of new wrapping up or new sort of packaging is going to be. And that's where a lot of the shared services organizations have struggled. And to your point, and I think Mike and Shane, you've articulated or you've said the same thing, which is, we're not saying that the transaction stuff needs to go away. What we're saying is likelihood of transaction stuff being taken over by AI-based engines, RPAs, is likely to increase. But having said that, it's that we're not going to see all of a sudden everything is going to be done by robots in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years. That's not going to happen. You know, we are still going to see a large number of shared services. But on the other side, here's an opportunity, and the functions have existed for so long. Usually the shared services leaders tend to be people who are smart, who are intelligent, who have good, strong business acumen as well. And this is an opportunity where they could probably do more and become that extension of the CEO or the COO, where they provide that extra bit of intelligence through their understanding of the business? Should we formalize the process, and should we say, okay, guys, we understand you do the transactions. Should you also do this part of intelligence generation? So, Mike, let's hear from you, and then Shane, and I'll come back to you, Michael.
I think the what we're hitting on is one of the barriers to moving out. So yes, most of us started from a cost base argument, and we're very successful in that. In order to do that, it's not just wage arbitrage, but the type of person that you need to be an accounts payable clerk, and no disrespect here, isn't necessarily going to design your knowledge management solutions. And therefore, when you go and say, well, we need to get one of these resources or 10 of these resources, and by the way, we need to pay them, people, but you're supposed to be cheap. No, we're effective. And there's a hell of a difference into that. And as you go up the value add chain, the wage arbitrage globally gets smaller and smaller, because these people have got a global market that they can play in and are rightfully very much in demand. So we've got to break the back of this is a cost play. This is now a quality and output and leadership play for actually delivering benefit. So we want to move from being a cost center to actually being a profit center in places. My last project, which thank God I got over the line 3 days before I retired, but that was totally a business project. We had a third-party outsourcer providing business critical information, and actually that third party was one of our big competitors. Were looking at buying that third party, potentially turning that service off to us overnight. So there was a huge, strategic business risk there, and we looked at it and we said, no, we can do this, and we've done it, and the volumes have gone twice to what they were before, and the prices come down. So perhaps I'm doing myself no favors by doing it cheaper. But these are areas that were not thought of as base transactional. These were thought of as needing a lot of business unit specific knowledge. Well, yes. But knowledge is knowledge, and you can train people, and you can get that knowledge. How do you start a new starter in the business unit? In the same way as you can start them in a GBS if you wish. But we've got to get away from the idea that this is pure commodity cheap labor force, because they will not be able to reproduce what it is we're looking here. So we're changing the game slightly in terms of who we're employing to deliver the goods.
Yeah, Anirvan, I see very, very similar, that as you were describing, kind of like the different levels or the different responsibilities, that from being just just doing the shared service function to growing it into what to me is a stronger level of ownership around the role in GBS. That takes time of people in the role, different levels of skill that will come in to drive a lot more around continuous improvement. There's got to be a lot more focus around the development of metrics. What do those metrics mean, not only within your process, but more importantly, being able to upskill and influence the business processes that come in. I think to kind of go into the knowledge hub of it, you've got to get far more involved within the data, and it's a totally different level of influencing. So I think if the organisation thought that they were at a GBS perspective, and Michael, I liked what you were describing before around the Malaysia. You got to bring people along with what is the organisation capable. You upskill it, but each upskilling, I think, has a fresh injection of talent and a different skill set that you need. And a skill set necessarily of being able to do the work as a GBS will need also a different skill set to come in if it's going to get more involved in the data, the decision making, strategic, working with the businesses. And that's a very different role I think the organisation would start to play. And you'd have to have the right level of skills to come in. I don't think they naturally just grow within the organisation just because of some of the maturity that's coming out of your GPS processes.
Right. So, Michael, I'm just going to come to you 1 second. While Shane, you're talking about it. So, if you remember back in the GE days, right? I mean, if you saw the way GE constructed, the Jack Welch, technology centers in Bangalore, the R&D innovation hubs in Germany, as well as in India, there were so many other sort of, let's call them back offices that were created that were not necessarily made part of the shared services. Very similar structures of like a shared services are, but they're just not called shared services. They were the R&D centers, they were the market intelligence centers. Does it make sense? And this is going to be the discussion for the next round. So I just thought I'll drop this, and then let's Michael handle that question. And Michael, when you respond, I just want to add one more angle to your response, or one more aspect to your response, which is when we look at shared services versus outsourcing company, we find that the shared services wants to do more of the same thing better, cheaper, faster, whereas the outsourcing companies are also wearing that innovation hat, saying, hey, you know what, we've got artificial intelligence coming in, we've got other stuff coming in, and therefore we need to do some other pieces as well. This whole entrepreneurial angle that's making the outsourced companies or the outsourcing companies do a lot more thinking in that space versus shared services, where people have been settled, or people have settled down in some sort of an environment that they are very comfortable with. As long as you keep making incremental changes, I will be okay. So I just want to, if possible, add that angle to your response as well.
I think one thing to consider is, somebody says, what is correct for GBS? Should GBS be doing this or that? My answer always for GBS organizations, when I meet CEOs of companies who come into the region and all that, is, what are you looking for? Because where you are today is not where you're going to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. It's not where you were 5 years ago. An organization could be creating a fantastic product today. They could be creating a fantastic service tomorrow. And the day after, they could be downsizing the organization. You cannot take a GBS organization and say, I'm going to do exactly the same for you in all three phases. Each phase is very different. So you have to tie it to what is the business looking for. So if I turn around and say, I'm going to help you set up a shared service organization that's going to be fantastic in driving down your cost, that may not be what they're looking for. They might be looking to transform the business and do something very different. So I think, the ability to measure what is success is going to be determined by what you're trying to do. Is success input driven, as in is success price per FTE in a GBS organization, or is success output driven? Is it based on a dashboard of KPI that is driven by the CEO? That determines your discussion. If I'm having a discussion with the CFO about driving up value, the CFO is not going to be interested in that. He wants to drive down costs. If I'm having a discussion with a CEO about driving down costs, he's not going to be interested in that. He wants to drive up value. So we have to determine exactly what we're looking for. And I think going back to Shane, you spoke about what we're looking for. As we move into the KPO space, domain knowledge is very, very important. I can't be having a discussion with an engineering company based on my IT knowledge. I'm talking to the CEO, and I've done this before. I've flown to London. I've met the head of BAE Systems. the largest security company in the world. And we've got 20 minutes with the board of directors. We fly in, we sit down, we explain our value proposition, and then we walk out after 20 minutes. If in 20 minutes I can't articulate what their value proposition is, what their pain points is, and I can't articulate what Malaysia is going to bring to them, I've lost the business. So you must have that domain knowledge from the knowledge space very, very clearly. And you can't go back to your original people who've done SSO or GBS. It's a very small pocket of people that are going to make a difference here. Now, if you go back to your finance head and say, look, I need to hire 20 people with fantastic domain knowledge of the security industry, he's going to say, go fly kites. That's a cost to me, and I'm not interested in that. But if you go to the CEO, it's a very different value proposition. So I'm saying it all is suited for purpose. So we cannot expect to say this will solve the world. But we have to go back on a case-by-case basis and determine what we're trying to achieve in each place. Sorry, I'm bored and I get overexcited, but I...
Oh, no, this is very good. And actually, this is kind of nicely puts the argument in perspective, right? So I'm just going to extend on that argument and say, okay, we've seen some of the larger outsourcing players. I'll talk about Accenture's and Tata Consultancy Services and Wipros of this world, right? They have diversified their portfolio of work into other spaces as well. It's analytics, data analytics, big data analytics is a big one. It's not just about business intelligence, but handling this gargantuan amount of data that gets produced by IoT devices, produced by social media, external world interactions, where it's not just gigabytes and terabytes, but it's like a zillion times bigger data. These guys have expanded into that space, right? And obviously they have the right intent, they have the incentives and all of that stuff. Why can't GBS do that? Or why shouldn't GBS do that?
It's all driven about market value and money. Is it what the company is looking for? Is it what the company is trying to go after? I mean, GBS can do that. But if GBS starts to evolve into all different areas, if it's not based on what the KPI is and what they're measured on, what's the purpose of doing all that? Then everybody's going to fail, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Michael, thanks for playing along. Does the company want? The answer in the majority of the cases is yes. The company actually wants that market intelligence. The company actually wants to be competitive. And the company wants that knowledge to be made available to them. So the answer is yes. I guess the ball gets dropped somewhere in between, and which is where, again, a very fragmented, siloed approach where marketing may pick up some pieces, supply chain may pick up something else, and GBS potentially, or most of the times, does not pick up anything because they're too busy doing the transaction kind of work. And again, I'm generalizing the idea for the sake of argument, but that's where a big debate is: what should be the future of GBS? Mike, I saw you nodding your head. Mike stops. What's your take?
Well, there's a few things you've said there. One is I'm not sure that the BPOs were particularly innovative. I think it took them a hell of a long time to suddenly realize that things like RPA were challenging their price per head or price per seat model. And they certainly were not rushing out, going to people and saying, oh, we can reduce your costs by this if we do this. And they've, of course, had to change that. Otherwise, it was looking a fairly bleak future on that. In terms of moving into data analytics, etc., I mean, this is a real problem area for a lot of companies, particularly those that are not cash rich. How much does a data scientist cost? Quite a lot is the answer. So people like Accenture can, and any of the others, I'm not just picking on them, but they can put together a model. They can put together sales teams in conjunction with most of the big suppliers of software, etc. And then they can develop that model and then flog it and flog it and flog it and flog it, which is the standard approach. Whereas if you're doing it in-house within GBS, you've got all the costs of developing the model, but you only get the one reward coming back from it. Now, the fact that it probably costs you a tenth of the cost of getting somebody external in to come in and do it is an argument that each business has to come up with. But certainly in today's buyer's market, you wouldn't want to be training up a whole load of data scientists only to see them walk down the road as soon as they're trained up. That would be better to have that as your BPO's problem. So it's a really tricky area to be in.
So I'll challenge you on that one, right? Thinking, which is the data scientist, right? So instead of typically, let's say, cost to a company, an AP guy costs you, let's say, $50,000, and I'm just making up some numbers here, whereas a data scientist probably costs you about $100,000, right? So, and if I need to set up a data analytics team, I probably am talking about 4 or 5 different, maybe 10, so each of the difference, and I'm just doing a back of a fact pack calculation here, right? So between $500,000 to $1 million can give me that advantage, which for a company which does have shared services can run into millions of dollars of advantage. I'm just playing the devil's advocate, right?
Yeah, and I think that it comes down to something Michael said earlier, which is trust. Do you trust me to take that $500,000, $1 million investment and then pay it back over the next 5 years, lots and lots of times over? Or do you want to put that in a one-off with a BPO and get one lot of benefit from it? But funnily enough, if you want another lot of benefit, it's the same price next time you go back to them.
Yeah.
So
is it
my personal choice was always bring it in-house and do it our way. We were an incredibly cash-strapped company, and therefore, actually, the one you either did it yourself and cheap, or you didn't do it, generally speaking. And we were quite successful on that, or even in places very successful on that. But it comes down to that trust that Michael mentioned. The business has got to trust that you are here to try and you've got the same goals as the CEO. Right.
So let me kind of flip the coin and put it to the other side. So on one side, we're talking about the trust. On the other side, it's also the brevity or being brave for the shared services leader, right? And back at that, and because Sharon and I, we have a long history with GE. In GE, if you didn't ask for it, you never got it. That was as simple as that, as it used to go, right? Many of the shared services leaders, I find, are shy of asking for that. It's not necessarily about whether the C-level the executives have trust in them, but whether they have the balls to ask. And again, generalizing it for the sake of argument, should GBS leaders step up and say, hey, this is something that I should be able to do quite easily. I've got the structure, the framework, all of the experience that's required. The only piece is it's a new area, new service. Are you going to go and co-invest with me? So Michael, you strained your neck. So let me ask you that question first.
I would turn around and say it's based on what the business wants. I mean, it's not whether I have the balls to go off and do something. If I hire a shared services head to optimize my business, then I expect that person to deliver the numbers associated with optimizing the business. If he turns around and starts creating balls and going off and creating risk and upsetting the business, then I've got a much bigger problem to handle, because he's disrupting my business in many parts of the organization. A GBS setup is something that is operating on a worldwide basis. So either I've hired a person to optimize my costs, or I've hired a person to drive up value. Two different things. Yeah, and I can't expect the same person. I can if I measure him on that. At the end of the day, you measure people based on KPIs and numbers. I hire you. This is your KPI. This is what you expect to deliver. If I turn around and say, I want you to drive up value, that's okay, as long as we agree to that. But if the person that I've hired turns around and based on their own whims and fancies decides to drive up value, and it's not something that I planned for, then I've got a real problem there. So I think it really goes back to what the company is looking for and where they want to put their trusted people around the globe. And that's important, very, very important to an organization. There could be some organizations like Essentia, and I've seen this happen with Essentia and BP, British Petroleum, where they've turned around and they've created shared service organizations, and then they spun it off and they sold off that organization because they've outsourced things that are non-key to their business, and then they outsource it and pass it on to somebody else, and then they focus on higher value stuff. And that is a part of a strategy, which is okay. I think that is perfectly okay. But it has to be something that is everybody agrees upon.
And Michael, picking up on some of those, as you start to go into whether it is knowledge management and the like, there's a big change management piece involved in it. And I do agree, the expectations are really, really critical upfront, and who is the key stakeholder that's going to help translate that. The part, Anavan, that I kind of struggle a little bit with as you start to move forward, there's genuine skills, capabilities within a whole lot of the, whether it's Accenture, PwC and the like. You need help and support, I think, to create the framework up front to be able to make the organization even more aware of some of the risk and what the organization do and the CEOs to actually get that next level of growth done. I think it's a really tough gig to be able to bring in even competent people from those organizations without the broader infrastructure that they have. So yes, you pay a higher price up front, but I think the value that you're going to get out of it up front is probably then enabling you to build it internally, but a really tough gig to be able to do it right from day one.
Yep, absolutely. And, I like stirring the pot. As which is why I get to be the facilitator, I guess, right? So nobody said getting training data scientists and being able to gain insights or derive insights was going to be an easy job. The question comes in two formats, or let's say two stages. Does the company need it? And this is where Michael, you're trying to say, what does the company need and how does it translate? And the second thing is, if the company needs it, should GBS step in, or should the shared service step in, saying, yeah, you know what, while we have been a risk averse, very controlled focused, very rule-based organization in the past, but we now have the competency to be able to do a broader business-wide exercise where we can start deriving intelligence from, let's say, whether it's data or whether it's a new age technology or what have you. So the first fact, that does the business need it? The answer in many cases is a resounding yes. The question is, should GBS step forward and say, yes, now we have an opportunity, while we believe we believe that this is an area that we should be able to leverage our frameworks, our expertise, which we have, but the journey will be half done with that sort of thinking. For the next level of thinking, we need to think collaboratively. Just your thoughts. So, Mike or Michael, Shane.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely. It's GBS should step up and into that position. The issue comes as to whether or not the organization as a whole is mature enough then to turn around. And when GBS says, these are the steps we have to take, you don't get the, well, who the hell are you? You're a transactional processing engine. You don't tell me what to do. I'm the business, that sort of response. So you've got to have your stakeholders in place. The only other way of doing that would be to say, right, we will take this, we will do it small scale, we will do it on our own, we will show you what we are capable of and then grow from there. But again, it's difficult to do. So the whole organization needs this goal congruence. If knowledge management is the way forward, and I tend to agree it is the way forward, then the whole company has to be in it. You can't have people saying, yes, but this is my bit of knowledge. I don't share my knowledge, but I do take all of yours and get richer from your efforts, but you can't get richer from mine. So you absolutely, I don't think GBS can just sit there and say, yep, we're going to do it. So yes, we're prepared to do it if.
And Everyone, I'll give you an example. In Malaysia, we had one organization, a semiconductor company, a global semiconductor company. They set up a shared services GBS organization in Malaysia. This was one of 6 towers that they had set up around the world. This was a US based, one of the largest semiconductor companies in the world. And they had 6 towers around the world. Each one of the GBS organizations was supposed to deliver certain functions, and each was measured against what they were supposed to deliver. The person who ran the Malaysian organization turned around and said, okay, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I will deliver exactly what I'm supposed to deliver. But at the same time, I understand that in order for me to get more business, I need to enhance the level of trust between me and my parent organization. She invested in sending some very key critical people across to the US on a 6 to 12 month assignment. And those people that went across there were her key people. So while she was running her organization here, she invested in those people, and those people ended up building relationships. After work, they would go out and have drinks. They would go and talk to the people and all that. And those people came back 6 to 12 months later to Malaysia. Essentially what happened was the organization, that major global semiconductor organization, decided to collapse all the 6 GBS centers into one here in Malaysia, in Penang. And they moved all the business here because that level of trust was there. Now, if she had not gone out on a limb and did something like that, she wouldn't have got that trust and the business wouldn't have come here. But it still comes back to that level of, will I outsource something to that level of trust halfway across the world to somewhere else? No, so I think that's critical still.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you've raised some very good points about that. There is a level of trust that needs to be there, the relationship that needs to be built. So sort of moving forward in the discussion, when we see the way the world is evolving, right? So we've got these high-speed connections, the global connectivity. We also look at VUCA world, which is because of the pandemic, the hybrid working model, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter where you're based. We're also looking at some of the other trends that are impacting the business world. One of the big factors is cross-functional efforts, right? So if you look at customer experience, right? Customer experience is no longer just about customer support. Customer experience could pretty much start from the person who developed the web page for you, right? Customer experience could be the social media handle that you had, So for example, I interacted with an airline through their Twitter handle, or I saw a post from LinkedIn with a particular company. It could also be the way data was shared between a prospect and the company. So there were the IT guys get involved, marketing guys get involved, product guys get involved. What we find is more and more people or activities that going forward are going to take place is going to be more of a cross-functional effort, and definitely at a higher value, a value impact to the customer kind of a situation, where it's going to be more cross-functional, multifunctional approach than we ever did in the past. Not just that, as per Dell, 73% of the conventional jobs that we used to know are going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. What that means essentially is people who were doing, let's say, simple ATL marketing. These days, you look for Insta marketeers or Facebook marketeers. The same way, I'm sure when it comes to accounting, people are probably going to, there'll still be chartered accountants required, but for the others, it's going to be, I don't know, I'm just thinking about RPA specialists, who specialize in accounting. the jobs are going to change. They're going to get a lot more cross-functional going forward. Also, how does that impact to the current construct of GBS? Because GBS, by and large, the construct that they had over the last 20 years have pretty much stayed very, very similar. But going forward, it's going to be a cross-functional endeavor. So to your point, Michael and Mike, when we're talking about organizations, functionals need to come together to do more of the stuff. What would you think should GBS also be looking at purely from the functional coverage that they have right now?
I think if we go to one of the questions you raised earlier, which I would say is about centers of excellence rather than shared service. So, R&D quite often is seen as it's not a shared service. Well, of course it does all the R&D for the company. You don't have an R&D in every department, so it is a shared service. But obviously, it operates as a center of excellence. And that side of things, and again, I don't care whether it reports in through the GBS or whether it reports in elsewhere in the organization, as long as it exists and it's functionally excellent. Center of excellence, the excellent bit of excellence should actually describe what it does and not just be something they pat themselves on the head with and demand pay rises for. So those need to be developed more and more. But what certainly I was seeing in my old job was that more of that work was being looked at to come into GBS because they liked the way it operated. Now, I don't think we'd ever take R&D into that. I mean, we need, that's completely separate. But things like VAT, why not? You can take those in. There's lots of areas that you can bring in and demystify and therefore get better at. So although there are bits of GBSs that are similar, that are the same, I've never met two GBS leaders who do the same thing. And that's absolutely right. And I think it goes to Michael's point, what does the business want? What does the business need? Because none of our businesses are identical. Even if we are competitors, we're not identical. And therefore, the GBS, even if it just comes down to culture being different in the organization, it may, this GBS model may work in this company, but not in that company. And so I think you've got to be always looking for opportunity. And again, I think it comes back, I think it was Michael who said about, do you hire somebody to optimize or do you hire somebody to grow? We always looked at it that we had both. So we have a development and then operations. Development, develop it, get it up and running, and then you hand it over to operations, and operations then take it and make it even better, by optimizing that. But that's where you need the trust from the rest of the organization in the development arm, that it is worth having that and paying for that because it pays back hugely over time.
And one point that I want to just bring up, as you know, I'm also involved with the universities because one large part of my work has always been industry academia collaboration. There's no point in driving industry when we don't have academia supporting them. So I sit on the board of two various universities, and a lot of that has been around how do we create talent to farm into the industry, depending on where it goes. And so for GBS, one of the things we've been looking at universities is, how do we build GBS skills at universities? And the initial thoughts by some of the universities and various people was, let's have a degree in GBS. And I said, no, you cannot have that. You do not have a degree in GBS. GBS is a vertical. It's a horizontal. GBS is a horizontal that supports multiple domains. So if you have KPOs in engineering, in healthcare, in finance, in HR, each one of them needs to be an expert at what they do. And they need to understand how that links to GBS. And I think that's critical in what we're trying to do as well. So when it comes to building talent to support the knowledge domains. We might have a few people who are very good at certain knowledge domains, and then we have GBS as a vertical that supports that. And that's so critical that governments and countries and companies need to understand that that is what they want to do. I had to go back to universities to say, stop, don't build degrees in GBS. You do not have a degree in GBS. You know, GBS is a supporting industry to support various domains of knowledge. So when we talk about KPO or knowledge centers, we have to define what are the domains that we're looking at. And we can't be everything to everybody, you know, so, yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up, Michael. In fact, these are I call potential trigger points for the next round of discussion that we're going to have in the, because literally, you know, and I always try to cross-pollinate ideas from sort of different angles. So on one side, the 20th century was all about functionalization. It was all about you know, it started out back from the Ford days, you know, the early Ford days, T-model days, where people started specializing in functions. That was the main essence of the 20th century. In the 21st century, is that going to be this case, or is that going to be a lot more cross-functional, multidisciplinary approach that's going to take place? And I agree with you, Michael, that GBS is a multidisciplinary approach with strong understanding of some of the domains that are there, right? So that's, but then that's a topic for the next round of discussion. We are getting towards the end of our schedule, but before we do that, I just want to hear quickly about 5 years down, or maybe 10 years down, you know, what do you think the shared services, the global shared services, should look like? Your vision or your BHAG thinking. So, Mike, yeah, let's start with you.
Being retired, I can promise the earth, can't I? It's not.
Of course, exactly.
Right. I think what you're going to see is GBS is continuing to do the basics with a lot more automation coming in there, and that will all go a lot slicker. But then you will see people moving out into different niche areas, whether that's within the business line itself or within the functions themselves, and being trusted with more value-added work. And I think that's where it'll come to. What I would love to see is that when you ask for talent to come, you know, from the rest of the organization for a spell in the GBS, you get the same response as when you go into a GBS and say, who wants to go out for a talent placement outside? Because I think that's when you will see that actually everybody looks at that at the GBS completely differently. It isn't a place of a cheap workforce. It isn't transactional bashing and boshing. It's a really efficient engine and driver of profitability for the company, and a place to build your career.
Brilliant, brilliant. Shane, I'll ask you for what's your vision, 5 to 10 years? What would you like to see the shared services to look like here?
The key area of focus that I kind of like see is still around the automation aspect, but I think the biggest driver there is going to always come down to the maturity of the systems, what the organization is looking to do from change. So I've kind of like worked in a couple of organizations where that has been, I think, an area where it's been under delivered, but the biggest barrier was around the system. So I think you're going to have a number of organizations that can continue to excel and be able to get further benefit through that automation. I think you're going to still find a number of the organizations that will get it to a certain level, but just can't extract the full value out of it until they can kind of get a more common organizational ERP and just take away some of the barriers that are out there. So I'd like to kind of like, from a focus, continue to drive. There have robotics, AI, they've been there, but I don't think it's probably hit the level of maturity that I thought was probably going to occur 5-10 years ago. So it's probably there, but I think the organizations, and it's expensive to be able to get the kind of like the foundations right to drive that. But I think if you're not getting the systems, even things around the knowledge base are going to be incremental for what any organization is going to be able to achieve.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Michael.
I think GBS is going to be around for a long time. I mean, whether we still call it GBS or whether we're going to call it something else, at the end of the day, I think digital transformation will continue to grow. Everything that we touch will be digital. The metaverse is coming along. Data is coming along. The data protection, the GDPR stuff in Europe and all that stuff, Facebook and Google and all these guys, all the trouble that they're going through, but it's all about digital transformation. It's about IP ownership. It's about, everything that we're doing right now. So where we're at with GBS, it is still going to be there. We just need to make sure that we're going to be there. We're going to be able to drive down costs. We're going to drive up value. We're going to be able to focus on data. But at the end of the day, I think all of this depends on how we're adding value to the organization. If we're not adding value to the organization, we will die a natural death. So we cannot lose fact of the fact of the thing that we must be there to add value to where the organization goes to. But I think we've got, what did they say? The future's so bright, I got to wear shades or something.
That's a nice way of putting it. If the future is bright, wear shades. Yeah, absolutely. I think this discussion has been really wonderful. I must say there have been various perspectives that were given to make it a holistic discussion. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. Just quickly wrapping up. So essentially the topic was, should GBS reinvent itself as the knowledge hub of an organization? I think we probably did not hear a resounding yes or a resounding no. I believe the answers lied somewhere in between. It's definitely not a reinvention, but it's to do a lot with trust. It's to do a lot with the risk appetite, the organizational level thinking. One thing is for sure, GBS is going to exist, as you rightly pointed out, at least for the next few years, if not longer. At the same time, there are pieces that are evolving. Organizational leaders are demanding more for GBS. So whether it's a knowledge management or knowledge hub or something else, it's for each of the organizations to decide. But for us, and specifically for Shane, I would like to thank all of you who have taken part in this discussion. It's been a brilliant discussion, and I hope the audience who are watching it or listening to it through podcasts now or later will be able to enjoy the candidness and the transparency of the discussion so far. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we go and switch off the discussion, let's quickly hear from Shane. What's the best way to connect with you, Michael, and then Mike? What's the best way to connect with you guys to continue the discussion further?
My easiest one is via LinkedIn. I think I'm one of the few in Shane Stacey's out here in Australia. So I'm sure if you put Shane Stacey Australia or WPP, you'd well and truly find me very quickly.
Yeah, mine would be the same. Michael Warren, Malaysia. You'll find me. I'm all over the place. That and other social media places.
Yeah, and with me, I'm pretty sure I will be the only Mike Stops on LinkedIn. So it's a very unusual name. So you should be able to find me fairly easy on that.
Right, and it was not intentional that the buck stopped with you, Mike, but it's Mike Stops. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure hosting Shane, Michael Warren, and Mike Stops in our conversation today. And if you liked our conversation, if you want to participate in these conversations in the future, do send us a comment in the LinkedIn or the YouTube live, and connect with us directly to our team. And if you really like it and want to share it with your friends, don't forget to hit the like button and share it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have fun.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thank
Thanks
you,
a
guys.
lot, everyone.
Mike, excellent.
Bye.